She thought she was the only one. The moment she opened her mother's letter, her whole life fractured. Her twin sister, her very own mirror, had been hidden away. But that was just the beginning. A secret that would make her question everything. She thought she knew about family, identity, and loyalty. One phone call, one voice that sounded eerily familiar, and a flood of unspoken questions poured into her life. Was she really who she thought she was? And why was she never told? The letter sat on the kitchen table, an oddity among the clutter of unfinished bills and unread magazines. She had seen it before, its corner crinkled, the pale blue ink on the address line faded, but it hadn't registered until now. It was as if it had been there for years, waiting to be opened. Maggie's fingers hovered above the paper, hesitating. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, her mother's, the handwriting she hadn't seen in years. The last time she'd held anything her mother had written was the last birthday. Card she'd received, a card that never mentioned the words "I love you." The last time her mother had even acknowledged her, truly acknowledged her, was 10 years ago. She had never understood why her mother had left. There was always an ache, something more than absence. Her mother's departure had been a silence too deep to fill, a vacuum of unspoken things. Maggie had grown up in that silence, alone, her world stitched together by half-truths and the careful avoidance of old wounds. But this letter seemed to tear that silence open. The moment her fingers tore the edge of the envelope, a small ripple of something unfamiliar washed over her. Unease, anticipation, fear. She couldn't place it, but she felt it. In her bones, as though she was stepping into a memory she couldn't quite remember. The paper inside was yellowed with time, the edges soft like fragile parchment. She unfolded it slowly, too slowly, as though if she went too fast, it would all dissolve into smoke, disappear into the past. Her breath caught when she saw the words, "Your twin sister is out there, and I never told you." The world spun. Her vision blurred. The room seemed to shrink around her, the sound of her heart thrumming in her ears louder than the ringing silence in the room. She stumbled back from the table, the letter still in her hands, trembling. She couldn't focus. She couldn't breathe. Her twin sister, out there? Why had her mother never said a word? Why had she kept this from her? She reread the letter, the words jagged and stark against the background of her grief. There was no explanation, no comfort. Only that single harrowing sentence. Maggie's mind raced as she searched for answers, but they only came in waves. Crashing and retreating. She was an only child. She always had been. Her mother had made sure of it. But this shattered everything. The letter didn't stop there, though. The rest of the words, written hastily, almost as though the ink had been forced onto the page, spoke of things left unsaid for years. The twin sister had been hidden, kept away, to protect you, her mother had written. Protect her from what? From whom? The room was cold now. The weight of the words pressed into her chest like the weight of the entire world. She had to sit down. The world outside the window, the sunlight filtering in, felt foreign now. Nothing was what it seemed. She read the letter again, the question rising like bile in her throat. Why? The silence that followed was suffocating. For a long time, she stared at the letter, as if waiting for it to tell her something more. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath her, the truth too heavy to carry. The letter was still in her hand, clutched so tightly that the paper crinkled. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to go. The world was a place she no longer recognized. And then the phone rang. The shrill tones sliced through. The silence, too sudden, too sharp. Maggie froze. She glanced at the phone, her heart skipping a beat. She could almost feel the pulse of it, the vibration of what was to come. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the receiver. Her breath caught in her throat as she lifted it to her ear. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was unmistakable, a voice so eerily familiar that it could have been her own. The voice that echoed in the chambers of her mind for years. The voice of a person who should never have existed. But it wasn't her. It wasn't Maggie. "I'm your twin," the voice said, soft and unsure. "I'm your twin sister." The air in the room thickened. Her heart pounded against her chest as the words began to unravel, each syllable a knife twisting in her gut. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. Her mind couldn't process the fact that this was real. It was happening. It was happening now. The question that had never been asked had been answered. She wanted to speak, to ask something. Anything, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel, but she heard herself speak. The words tumbled out in a whisper, a breathless gasp. "Why? Why didn't she tell me?" "I don't know," the voice said, and for a moment, Maggie could hear the pain there, the fear, the same aching void of silence that had surrounded her mother's departure. "You'll understand," the voice continued, "soon enough." The call ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the faint echo of a life Maggie never knew she had. She lowered the phone, her hand shaking. The room seemed darker now, colder. The light that had filled it moments ago felt distant, unreachable. She stared at the phone for a long time, the weight of her mother's betrayal sinking deeper. This was the beginning of something she didn't understand, something that would destroy the world she had known and rebuild it on a foundation of lies. Her gaze drifted back to the letter, crumpled now in her hand. She couldn't look at it any longer. She couldn't hold it any longer. The truth was inescapable. There was no going back now. She crumpled the letter and dropped it into the trash can, the sound of paper hitting metal filling the room with a hollow finality dot, and then, like a distant memory finally surfacing, she understood. The search for the truth had just begun. The house was still. Too still. Maggie stood in the dim kitchen, the letter now a crumpled scrap in the trash, her eyes blankly fixed on the empty space where her mother's clutter used to sit. The dishes had been washed, but the scent of stale soap lingered in the corners. Her fingers traced the edge of the worn countertop, the cool smoothness a stark contrast to the warmth she had once felt in this room. Her mother's house was always cold. Not physically, though the house was never quite warm enough, but emotionally. She could never recall a time when the walls felt like home. Even as a child, she had known it was a place of silence, a house filled with the residue of what was unsaid. And now, after all these years, that silence had grown into a suffocating presence. She walked slowly to the living room, where the old portrait of her mother still hung. It was the same one from years ago, her mother, young and hopeful, smiling into the camera, a glint in her eye that Maggie hadn't recognized until now. How could someone so full of life, someone who could hold a smile like that, become the woman who left so many things unsaid? The woman who had been there, but never really present. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, an innocent sound, yet to Maggie, it felt like a reminder of everything that had passed unspoken. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the background, sharp, careful. "No need to ask," she'd say. "Some things are better left alone." But Maggie couldn't leave it alone. The letter had opened a door, and now the truth behind that door clawed at her. Who was her twin? Where had she been all these years? Why was she hidden from her? She pulled open the drawer next to the couch, fingers brushing against the scattered papers, each one a relic of a past too distant to truly understand. She had been searching through these same drawers since the morning. Letters her mother had written long before Maggie was born, bills that had piled up in corners, a single photograph of a woman Maggie didn't recognize, a woman who might be her twin, but the image was too faded to be certain. There was something about the way the photograph looked, how it was tucked away among the clutter, that unsettled Maggie more than the letter. It wasn't just the hidden truth, it was the care with which it had been buried, like it had been waiting to be found, and yet never truly meant to be. Her breath caught in her throat as the next drawer opened. Beneath a pile of old receipts, A locket her mother's caught her eye. She hadn't seen it in years, not since she was a little girl. When her mother would wear it to church, a piece of her mother's warmth resting against her chest. She had asked about it once, but her mother's answer had been quick, distant. "It's nothing, just an old thing." That was the kind of answer her mother always gave. Nothing, just an old thing. Always something to push away the questions. Maggie felt the weight of the locket in her palm. It was cold to the touch, just as her mother had been cold. She hadn't noticed the inscription before. She hadn't wanted to. But now, with the world flipped upside down by that letter, the words carved into the metal sent a shiver down her spine. "For my twin." She dropped the locket back into the drawer, as if the truth inside it could burn her. "Why did you never tell?" "Me?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely a breath. There was no answer, just the echo of her own question, reverberating in the quiet space. The sound of the phone ringing snapped her back to the present, the noise sharp against the silence. Her heart quickened. Could it be her? Was it the twin? No. It couldn't be. She barely knew what she was looking for. How could she know what she was waiting for? With a trembling hand, she reached for the phone. "Hello?" Her voice barely escaped, tight and ragged. There was a pause. Then, a soft, familiar voice answered, and Maggie's breath hitched. "I'm your twin sister," the voice said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if it were the only thing she should have ever known. She didn't respond. Immediately, her pulse hammered in her ears. Was this real? Was this some cruel joke? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, frozen in the starkness of the truth she had been denying. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Maggie, I know this is overwhelming, but why?" Maggie cut her off, her voice raw. "Why didn't she tell me? Why was I kept in the dark? For what?" There was a long pause before the voice responded. "I don't know. But I've always known about you. Always. We have so much to talk about." Maggie shut her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. The weight of the locket still lingered in her palm, the words "for my twin" echoing like a haunting refrain. Her twin, an answer that didn't feel like an answer, but a hollow space where something had always been missing. What was her mother protecting her from? And what did it mean for everything Maggie thought she knew? She exhaled slowly, a tremor. In her chest, there was no turning back from this. The past was too full of cracks, too full of holes. And now, with the voice on the phone, it seemed as though the pieces were finally shifting. But as the voice continued, something dark twisted. Inside Maggie, was she ready to face whatever came next? Could the past ever be fixed, or was it doomed to remain in the shadows? The names surfaced in her mind, fragile and unfinished. Could it be her sisters? Maggie closed her eyes again, the room growing colder around her. The silence, once so familiar, was now a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The truth, long buried, was finally rising. The clock struck 2:37 a.m., its echo the only sound that filled the room. The night outside pressed against the windows, quiet and still, as though the world itself had held its breath. Emily sat in the dim glow of the desk lamp, her fingers tracing the edge of her mother's old locket. The gold was warm to the touch, as though it still carried something of her mother's warmth. The coldness that had settled in her chest since the letter arrived felt like a distant memory now. The call had come, and the world had fractured again. She hadn't expected it, couldn't have. The locket felt heavy in her hand, a tiny weight. In the sea of unanswered questions, she couldn't help but wonder if it had been her mother's final attempt at reaching out to her, some cryptic, unspoken message hidden inside its delicate folds. But there were no answers here. Only the quiet hum of the night, the slow, endless pulse of the world outside her door. Then the phone rang. It was sharp, sudden, breaking through the silence like a gunshot. Emily froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, the locket slipping from her fingers and landing softly on the desk. Her fingers hesitated over the phone, the weight of it too much to bear. She didn't want to answer. Not yet. She wasn't ready to hear what she already knew would be waiting on the other end. But the phone continued to ring, an unrelenting demand, dragging her toward a truth she wasn't sure she was ready for. She picked up the receiver, her breath shallow, the phone cold against her ear. "Hello." The voice on the other end was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper carried on the wind. And yet it was unmistakably familiar, a sound that made her pulse quicken, the hairs on her neck stand up. "Is this Emily?" Her breath caught. It sounded like her, only smoother, older, as though it had aged in the silence of 1,000 unspoken words. Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak. She could only listen, frozen in place, every second stretching into infinity. "Yes," she finally managed, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. "Who is this?" The voice hesitated. She could hear the sound of soft breathing, the distance between them stretching like an ocean. "I'm your twin," the voice said, and for a moment, the world stood still. "I'm your twin sister," the words hit her chest like a fist. She could hear them echo in her head, louder than the pounding of her heart. Twin sister. The words should have been impossible, should have been a lie, but they were real. They felt real, too real. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the silence in her throat was suffocating, strangling every question before it could form. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracked. "Why didn't she tell me?" "I don't know," the voice replied, the words laced with a sorrow Emily couldn't place. "But I've always known about you. I always knew you were out there." The phone line crackled, the sound jagged, as if the air itself was trembling under the weight of what was being said. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, the world spinning around her, too fast, too loud. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of it. I don't understand," Emily managed, her voice shaking. "How can this be real? How can you be real?" "I don't know," the voice whispered back, and for the first time there was a tremor in the words. "But I am." The quiet that followed was thick, suffocating. Emily held the phone like it was a lifeline, yet she couldn't seem to find the strength to grasp it, to pull herself out of the haze that surrounded her. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. The world she had built in the absence of her mother, in the silence of all the things left unsaid, was falling apart. "I'm not ready for this," Emily murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm not ready for you." "You don't have to be ready," the voice replied softly. "But I'm here. And I always have been." She couldn't take it anymore. She didn't know how to deal with the weight of this, how to make sense of it. The world felt like it was caving in on her, the weight of the phone pressing against her ear, her mother's locket still cold on the desk before her. This woman, this stranger, her twin, had always been there. And yet, Emily had never known. Phone clicked off, the sound harsh in the empty space, and there was only silence. Emily sat in the dark, the phone still in her hand, her breath shallow, her chest tight. She hadn't even realized she was crying until the tears began to fall. Slow and silent, she wiped them away, but they kept coming. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break something, to shatter the walls that had been built around her for so long. But she couldn't. She was frozen. This was the moment where everything changed, and yet she was still here, trapped in the same quiet house with only the ghosts of the past to keep her company. Her hand fell to the desk, the locket cold against her skin. She picked it up again, feeling the weight of it, the weight of everything it represented. There was no escaping this. No escaping the truth. The name surfaced in her mind, fragile and unfinished. Could it be her sister's? She pressed the locket to her chest, as if trying to hold everything together. But the silence remained, heavy and suffocating. And the questions, so many questions, swirled in her mind, unanswered, unsaid. But the one thing she knew, The one thing that had become crystal clear was that nothing would ever be the same again. The house felt emptier than it ever had. Emily sat on the worn armchair in the living room, the space around her silent, save for the soft ticking of the clock. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph, the edges curled with age. It was her mother, standing at the door, eyes bright, with a kind of quiet hope. She had always seemed so strong, so untouchable. Emily never realized how distant that strength made her, how it kept her from truly reaching Emily, from ever really connecting. The photo now sat before her, but it felt wrong, like a distant memory she'd only half remembered, as though it had been placed there by someone else. Her fingers brushed against the image, but the weight of it, of all the years that had passed, of the things unsaid, lingered in the air. Emily wasn't sure she'd ever felt so alone, even in a room full of things. It was strange. She had spent her entire life in this house, surrounded by the ghosts of a mother who loved but never spoke, a father who never questioned. Yet, every conversation she'd had with him lately only felt like more layers of silence. No one talked about the twin. It was as though no one ever had, or maybe they had, and Emily just hadn't been listening. She picked up the phone again, the weight of it a constant reminder of that call. The voice that spoke like her own, but older, softer. "I'm your twin," it echoed in her mind, a ringing in her ears that wouldn't stop. What did that mean? The questions kept circling. Where had she been all this time? Why hadn't anyone told her? And what now? What could she possibly do with all the silence that had been hanging over her life? The phone was still warm in her hands, but it didn't feel like it was hers anymore. The call had thrown everything out of balance, and now, even this room, the very space that had always held her, felt like it was slipping away. She stood, her feet moving on their own as she crossed the room to the hallway. Each step echoed too loudly, like they were weighted with the gravity of a question she hadn't asked. She knew she had to speak to her father, ask him why he hadn't ever said anything, why he'd let her grow up in the shadow of a lie. But her feet dragged, unwilling to meet the eyes that had always known too much and never said a word. The hallway felt longer than it should have, the walls pressing in on her, the old pictures hanging crookedly, reminders of a time before everything had been broken open. Her hand reached for the door to her mother's study. It was the only door in the house that was always closed, the one room Emily was never allowed into as a child. The silence there had always felt final, like a barrier between the past and the present, between the things her mother had wanted to forget and the things Emily hadn't been allowed to see. The door creaked slightly as she pushed it open. The room smelled of old paper and dust, memories that had long since been buried under the weight of time. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, almost expecting to see something, anything that would tell her what she needed to know. But there was nothing. Just the familiar clutter of her mother's life. Scattered papers, old books, a half-empty glass of wine on the desk. A worn leather chair sat in front of the desk, a chair Emily had seen her mother sit in countless times. But today, it seemed vacant, hollow. She walked to the desk, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface. It was strange how little had changed in this room. And yet, everything felt different. As if the silence here, the silence of all these years, was beginning to breathe again. Her eyes fell on a drawer, one of the smaller ones, tucked away at the far side of the desk. It was closed, its handle tarnished with years of neglect. Emily felt the pull, something deeper than curiosity, a quiet insistence that she needed to open it, that whatever lay inside was meant for her. Her fingers lingered on the drawer's edge for a moment, hesitation building in her chest. There was something about this act, about opening the door to the past, that felt final. As if once she opened this drawer, there would be no going back. With a soft click, the drawer slid open. Inside was a tattered envelope, yellowed with age. It was sealed with the same faint wax her mother used, the same wax she'd used on all the letters Emily had never seen. The ones her mother had locked away, or destroyed, or perhaps just forgotten. Emily picked it up carefully, the weight of it grounding her, pulling her further into the quiet abyss of what she had never known. The envelope was addressed simply, "To Emily." Her fingers trembled as she slid it open, not sure if she was ready to know what might be inside. But something in her, something deep and aching, insisted that she had to. She had to understand. Inside was another letter, the paper brittle, almost fragile. She unfolded it slowly, as if the letter itself might shatter at any moment. The handwriting inside was unmistakable, her mother's, but there was something else there too. A tremor, a hesitation that Emily had never seen before. She read the first few lines, her mind reeling, each word like a shard of glass pressing into her skin. "Emily, if you are reading this, then you have found what I've hidden, what I could never tell you. Your twin sister is real, she exists. And she always has." Her heart skipped a beat, and she read on. There was more, much more. But the words blurred. The room around her spun, the silence pressing in harder. What did this mean? What had her mother done? She folded the letter carefully, as if it might be the last piece of something that had never been whole. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, her body rigid with the weight of what she'd just uncovered. This was the moment when the truth had finally started to unravel. The twin, the lie, the silence, it was all here, buried in the drawer of a room Emily had never been allowed to enter. The letter felt cold in her hands now, the words she'd read pressing into her skin like a brand. She turned away, her eyes drifting to the door, the room around her spinning, and then she heard it. A faint sound, almost a whisper, the soft click of the locked drawer behind her. A name surfaced from the darkness of the past. Could it be her sister's? The silence in the house felt heavier than it ever had. Emily stood before the door to her mother's study, the old wood familiar and yet distant, as if it were an obstacle she had been walking toward her whole life, only now realizing how much it had kept her away. She hadn't expected it to be like this, standing on the other side, the weight of everything unsaid pressing against her chest. The questions had gathered for years, each one more pressing than the last, and now, the moment of truth felt more like a looming storm. Her heart pounded in her chest as her hand reached for the doorknob. It was cool beneath her fingers, metal smooth with age, yet there was a sense of finality in the motion. She turned it slowly, almost cautiously, and stepped inside. The room was dim, the air heavy with dust and the scent of something old, like the past had been locked in here, just like her mother had locked away the truth. The desk in the center of the room was still silent, as though it had not been touched in years. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the moments that felt like an eternity. Her mother's chair was empty, but the faint impression of her presence lingered in the space. The scent of her perfume, a faint trace of lavender, seemed to haunt the room, mingling with the shadows. And there, sitting against the far wall, was her mother. Not moving, not speaking, just waiting, as though she had been expecting Emily. The silence between them stretched, taut like a wire ready to snap. Emily's eyes locked with her mother's, searching for something, anything. But her mother's face was unreadable, the years of hiding herself reflected in her expression. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the mask she wore more visible than ever before. "You knew, didn't you?" Emily's voice broke the silence, quiet but sharp. The question had been sitting there for too long, building in the space between them. It was no longer just about the twin. It was about everything her mother had kept from her. Her mother didn't answer right away. She sat there, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the desk, as if the question had never been asked. But Emily could see it in her eyes, the flicker of something. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. Something had shifted. The air felt different now. "I never wanted to hurt you," her mother finally said, her voice low, almost hesitant. But you were never meant to know. Emily felt a coldness seep through her veins. Why? Why was I kept in the dark? Why was she kept in the dark? Her mother sighed. A heavy, almost defeated sound. She lifted her gaze, her eyes tired. I thought I was protecting you. I thought, if you never knew, if you never found out, maybe it would keep you safe. Keep you from this. Her hand motioned vaguely toward the room, as if the past, all the things she had hidden, were too heavy to bear. Safe? Emily's voice trembled with disbelief. You call keeping me in the dark safe? Her mother didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, the weight of the years pressing down on her. Emily watched her, the realization dawning slowly, like the slow crawl of a storm. Her mother wasn't just hiding the truth from Emily. She was hiding it from herself, too. The cracks in her defenses were becoming clearer now. There was a wound here, something Emily hadn't understood until this moment. A wound that had shaped everything. You don't understand, her mother whispered. It wasn't just about you. It was about me, too. Emily stepped forward, her breath shallow, a surge of emotion rushing to the surface. Then tell me why I never had the chance to know my sister. Tell me why I had to grow up feeling like there was always something missing, like something was always just out of reach. The silence between them stretched again, but now it felt different. There was no escape from the truth anymore, no more walls to hide behind. Emily could see her mother's lips tremble, her shoulders shaking slightly. She wasn't the rock Emily had always thought her to be. She was fragile, broken in ways Emily had never imagined. Her mother's hand reached into the drawer of the desk, her fingers slow, deliberate, as though she were pulling something from the past. Emily's eyes followed the movement, her heart hammering in her chest. When her mother pulled out a small, worn envelope, Emily's stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment everything would change. Her mother placed the envelope on the desk, pushing it toward Emily. You need to understand. I was never strong enough to tell you the whole truth. But you have to know. You have to know what happened. The truth about your sister, about everything. Emily's hands shook as she reached for the envelope. The air around her seemed to stop moving, the room narrowing as she unfolded it. Her breath caught when she saw the words written inside her. Twin's name, a name she had never heard before, never even imagined. Her heart lurched in her chest, and the room felt as though it was spinning. The truth finally was here. The envelope contained more than just a name. It was a confession, a story of secrets, of choices made in the shadows, of a life that had been hidden, locked away, kept from her. But there was more too. The handwriting was familiar, her mother's, but there was something in it, a trace of fear, a hint of guilt. Emily couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of truth. And then, in the quiet of that moment, she understood. Her mother had never protected her. She had only been protecting herself. From the shame, from the pain, from the consequences of what she had done. Her mother's tears spoke louder than words. What was the truth? And why had it been buried? The locket sat in her palm, cold and heavy. The same locket that had once rested against her mother's chest. The same one Emily had held as a child, clinging to the fragile hope that it somehow held the answers to all the questions she had never dared to ask. Now it felt like a weighted tether pulling her deeper into the shadows of a past that refused to stay buried. Emily's hands trembled as she traced the edges of the locket, the smooth metal feeling foreign, almost like it had been made for someone else. The words on the inside, faint with age, were still legible. For my twin. The same words her mother had written to her. The same words that haunted her every thought, every question. Who had they been? Who was she? She set the locket down on the desk, the soft click of it resting against the wood echoing through the room, its weight pressing on her chest. She couldn't understand. She couldn't make sense of it all. The revelation of Anna's existence had shattered her reality, and with every new layer of truth that was revealed, the weight of the lies grew heavier. Emily stood in the room, feeling the quiet rush over her, a tidal wave of emotion crashing into her. Her fingers brushed against the edge of an old photograph that had been tucked into a frame on the desk. It was a photo of her mother, taken years ago, before the world had changed. Before Emily had known that her mother had kept this dark secret. She ran her thumb over the frame, the glass smooth and cold. She could almost hear her mother's voice, her voice that had never been soft enough to comfort, that had always carried the edge of authority, of something unsaid. Emily had always known that something wasn't right. But to find out that there was another version of her life, a twin she had never known, a shadow of herself hidden away, was a betrayal too large to comprehend. Her breath hitched as she took the photograph in her hand. It felt heavier now. It wasn't just a photo. It was the past, the broken fragments of a family she had never understood. She had never asked the right questions. She had never dared to. And now everything was falling apart. There was a knock at the door. Emily didn't move. Her father stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. He hadn't come into the room in years. His silence had always been the loudest part of the house. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, but didn't say a word. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze, the years of unspoken things hanging between them. There had been no mention of Anna, not even now. Emily's pulse quickened, the air thick with the absence of answers. "You knew," Emily said, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "You knew about her. You knew about Anna." Her father didn't answer immediately. His hands were in his pockets, and he stood at the edge of the room, a figure of quiet regret. Finally he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Not at first," he said. "Not until later. Then why? Why didn't you tell me?" The words escaped before she could stop them, raw and desperate. "Why did you let me live with this lie? I've been living with this silence for so long. Why?" Her father shifted, his eyes casting downward. "I didn't want to hurt you, Emily. I thought it would be easier for you this way. You had a life, a good life. Why should I drag you into all of this?" Emily could hear the guilt in his voice, the same way she had heard it in her mother's when she had asked about the past. But the truth wasn't something that could be hidden forever. It wasn't something that could be buried beneath silence. "You didn't protect me," Emily said, her voice sharp now. "You didn't protect either of us." Her father's eyes flickered with something close to pain, something close to fear. But he didn't speak. There was nothing more to say. The truth had already been said, and now the pieces of her life, the things she had taken for granted, felt like they were slipping through her fingers. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. And in that moment, Emily understood. He had been protecting himself just as much as he had been protecting her. The weight of his own guilt, his own inability to face the truth, had kept him locked in silence. For the first time, she saw him not as her father, but as a man who had lived in fear of the very truth he had kept from her. His silence wasn't strength, it was a form of weakness, a way to avoid facing the consequences of the life they had lived. Emily turned away, her breath catching in her throat. The room was suffocating now, filled with the weight of years that had never been spoken. She couldn't look at him any longer. "Why didn't you tell me about Anna?" she asked again, her voice small now. She didn't want answers anymore, didn't want to know why. She just needed to hear it. Her father finally stepped closer, his hand shaking as he reached out, as if to touch her. But he didn't. The gesture, the thought of it, hung there in the air, unanswered. His face tightened, the lines of his age and regret more visible than ever. She was part of the life I didn't want to remember, he said, his voice cracking slightly. She was a part of a mistake, Emily. A mistake that I couldn't undo. The words cut through the room like a blade, and for the first time, Emily saw the depth of the lie her father had lived. The weight of his own decisions, his own buried truths, had kept him locked in a place where forgiveness seemed impossible. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't find the words. The air felt thick, suffocating. She looked at the photograph of her mother, the locket on the desk, the silent space between them. Her father's tears spoke louder than words. What was the truth, and why had it been buried? The silence between them felt like a thick fog, pressing in from all sides. Emily stood in the dim light of the living room, her heart pounding against her chest. The space between her and Anna seemed too vast to cross, yet too close to ignore. Anna's eyes, once so familiar, now felt foreign, as though they belonged to someone else, someone she didn't know, a stranger. Her twin, the person she should have known, the one she had been kept from. The photograph of them as children, two small faces, side by side, grinning in the sunlight, sat on the table between them, a cruel reminder of what had been stolen, what had been lost. Anna shifted, her fingers twitching at her sides. She wanted to say something, but the words were stuck, lodged in her throat like stones. Emily's gaze remained fixed on her, her anger simmering just beneath the surface, a low heat that refused to fade. It had been years of silence, years of wondering why she had been abandoned by fate. Why had she never known? And now this revelation, this truth she hadn't asked for, had fallen like an avalanche into her life. Why didn't you tell me? Emily's voice broke the quiet. It was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she had never said. Why didn't you come for me? Anna's lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked at Emily as though trying to find the words that would make sense of everything, but all she found were fragments of the same lies that had kept her silent for so long. She didn't know where to begin. The years stretched between them, heavy and full of ghosts. I didn't know how, Anna said, her voice trembling. I didn't know where to start. Her hand reached out, tentative, as though she wanted to bridge the gap between them, but stopped short, unsure. The movement felt too little, too late. Emily stood there, watching, feeling the old wound in her chest flare up. Her twin had been kept from her, hidden in the shadows, and now she stood before her, trying to make it all okay with a handful of words. The echo of her mother's silence pressed on Emily's chest, thick and suffocating. How could Anna have been kept from her? How could anyone think this was the right choice? The anger, the betrayal, it felt so raw, so fresh, despite the years that had passed. I never asked for this, Emily whispered, her eyes flashing with something fierce, something sharp. I never wanted this pain. I didn't want to know you like this, Anna, not after everything. Anna's face crumpled, a silent sob threatening to break free. She had spent years locked away, her own pain, too heavy to share, too dark to speak of. I know, I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't. I couldn't come to you. She looked down at her hands, the weight of her shame wrapping around her like a shroud. A tear slipped down Anna's cheek. I've carried it all these years. I never wanted you to feel like I was the one who took you away from your life, but I was, wasn't I? Her voice cracked, the guilt pressing into every word. Emily stood frozen, the flood of emotions threatening to drown her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to make it all stop, to make the hurt go away, but there was no going back. The past, with all its lies and silences, had caught up with them, and now they stood here, at the edge of something that could either break them or rebuild them. The room felt smaller now, as if the weight of their history had made the walls close in. The air was thick with unsaid things, with the ghosts of everything that had been kept in the dark. Emily's eyes flickered to the photograph again, the two faces smiling back at her from a time when she didn't know how empty her life had been. She wanted to reach out, to close the gap, but the anger inside her felt too strong, too sharp. "Do you think you can just come back into my life?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper, but the edge of it cut through the silence. "After all these years, after everything, you think we can just go back to how it was?" Anna's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands again, then back up at Emily, the pain in her eyes almost too much to bear. "I never wanted to take your life from you. I only wanted a chance to explain, a chance to make it right." Emily shook her head slowly, as if trying to clear the fog in her mind, as if she could unsee everything that had been laid before her. "Can we ever fix this? Can we heal from this?" The room was quiet. The soft ticking of the clock in the corner sounded like a drumbeat, slow and steady, marking the passage of time that couldn't be undone. Emily looked at Anna again. She saw the same pain there, the same scars that ran deep and unhealed. Anna wasn't the person she had imagined all these years. She was broken, too. They both were. "I don't know," Anna whispered. Her voice cracked, "But I want to try. I need to try." The words hung in the air between them, a fragile thread that seemed to stretch and pull with every breath they took. Emily's chest tightened, the anger that had been simmering slowly beginning to dissipate, replaced by something raw, something that felt too much to hold at once. Her heart beat in her ears, slow and steady. The silence between them was heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. Emily took a tentative step forward, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table. She couldn't go back. She couldn't undo the years of hurt, of silence, of lost time. But maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to look at Anna not as a stranger, not as the twin she had been forced to live without, but as someone who had suffered just as much as she had. Someone who had been lost in the same silence. The twins stood in the silence between them. Would they walk away, or finally step toward each other? The house was suffocatingly quiet. The air in the living room was thick with the weight of years of secrets, of things that had been said without saying, of silence that had been louder than any word. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, the room dimly lit by the flickering glow of the streetlights outside, casting long shadows across the floor. In her hand, she held the locket, the same one she had found months ago, the one that had started everything, the one that had unlocked the door to all of this. It was cool against her palm, its edges smooth, worn down by time. But it was heavy. Now, as if the weight of its truth had settled into her skin, she could still hear her mother's voice in the back of her mind. The words she'd never said, the things she had hidden. "I thought I was protecting you." The words came back like a phantom, filling the room with a kind of hollow ache. Emily squeezed the locket tighter. She hadn't wanted to face this. She hadn't wanted to confront the fact that her whole life, the world she had known, had been built on a foundation of lies. But the truth had forced its way in, like an intruder, uninvited and unwanted. Until there was no choice but to confront it. She looked at the photo on the wall, her mother's face, smiling back at her from years ago. A stranger's face. That person was gone, replaced by someone who had spent too long hiding, too long keeping things buried, too long pretending that nothing was wrong. And yet Emily understood now. Her mother hadn't been lying out of malice. She had been lying out of fear, out of love, in a twisted way. Fear of what the truth could do. Fear of what it would tear apart. Emily stood up, walking slowly to the window, the locket still clutched tightly in her hand. She gazed out at the street below, the quiet stretch of asphalt illuminated by the passing headlights of a car. She thought of the years she had spent in this house, the memories that had been shaped in this space, and how they had all felt incomplete. The feeling of something always missing, a piece of herself that she never knew existed. The pain had been hidden, a constant ache she never could name, until now. Turning back to the room, she walked to the desk where her mother's old letters still sat, untouched. She picked one up. The paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but still readable. The words were familiar yet distant, as though they had been written for someone else. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter, the same way they had traced the edges of the locket dot. It was a strange feeling, realizing that this was it. This was the moment of truth. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that the silence between them had been enough. It had never been enough. She let the letter fall from her fingers, the sound of paper brushing against the desk breaking the quiet. The truth had taken its toll, and now it was time to face the consequences. Her phone buzzed, the sudden noise pulling her from her thoughts. Emily picked it up, her hand still trembling slightly. She glanced at the screen. The name on the caller. I'd made her stomach turn. Anna. For a moment, she hesitated. What was left to say? What could she say to someone who had been kept from her all these years? Someone who had shared the same blood, the same history, yet was a complete stranger? What could they possibly have in common now? The phone buzzed again, a reminder that Anna was waiting on the other end, and the silence stretched longer than it should. Emily's finger hovered over the screen, her heart beating faster. She had to answer. She had to hear it from her, whatever it was. There was no more hiding, no more running from the truth. She answered the call. Emily? Anna's voice cracked through the phone, soft and tentative, as though she were unsure of what would happen next. Are you there? Emily closed her eyes. She wanted to hate her, wanted to blame her for everything. For the years of silence, for the questions that had no answers. But in that moment, she realized something. The truth wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about the lies they had lived with for so long. It was about something deeper, something more painful. She took a breath, trying to steady herself, trying to find the words. But nothing felt right. Why didn't you come to me? Emily asked. The words felt raw as they left her lips. Why didn't you tell me? Anna was quiet for a moment, the silence between them filled with the weight of their history. I wanted to come to you so many times, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you would want to know me. Emily's heart clenched. She could hear the pain in Anna's voice, the same pain that had been in her own for years. Anna wasn't just a victim of the secrets her mother had kept. She had her own scars, her own battles to fight. And maybe, just maybe, they were more alike than either of them realized. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. She wanted to scream, to let the years of hurt out. But all she could do was whisper. I don't know what to do with all of this. I don't either, Anna replied softly. But I want to try. I want to try to make this right. Emily closed her eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The years of silence, the years of waiting for answers, all of it had led to this moment. A moment of reckoning. A moment when the truth was no longer a shadow in the background, but something that had to be faced head-on. The silence between them stretched again, but now it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like the beginning of something else. Could forgiveness truly heal the wounds of the past, or would the scars remain forever? The morning light slipped in through the blinds, pale and tentative, like it was afraid to disturb the stillness in the room. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her fingers drumming absent-mindedly against the worn wood. The room felt smaller now, quieter. Even the usual hum of the refrigerator seemed muted, as if everything was waiting for something, waiting for her to take that next step, waiting for her to finally let go of the past. Her eyes drifted to the window, where a single bird perched on the sill, its wings trembling in the cold morning air. It was a fleeting moment, but it held something she couldn't quite name, a sense of possibility, of something new that could be born from the silence. She reached for the cup of coffee on the table, her hand pausing before it touched the ceramic, as if she were afraid of the warmth it would bring. The past had been so heavy. It had weighed on her for so long that she wasn't sure how to live without it. The soft clink of the door opening behind her pulled her from her thoughts. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The footsteps were familiar, slow, measured, uncertain. On a dot, she didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, in the doorway, her presence filling the room with a quiet tension. Emily could feel the weight of the years between them, the unspoken words that had kept them apart. She could feel the pain in the air, like it was pressing in on them, making it harder to breathe. Anna stepped forward slowly, her eyes glancing briefly at the locket on the table. Emily felt the familiar ache in her chest, the same ache that had lingered since the first day she found out the truth. She couldn't help it. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would make Anna feel the weight of everything, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't speak yet. Not until they both understood what had been left unsaid for so long. "I'm sorry." Anna's voice was barely a whisper, the words soft and trembling. "For everything. For not being there. For everything I made you feel." The apology hung in the air, fragile and tentative, like it might shatter at the slightest touch. Emily wanted to push it away, to dismiss it, but she couldn't. The silence between them had stretched so long that now it felt like it was tearing them apart. Anna took another step forward, her hand reaching for the edge of the table, her fingers brushing the locket as if she didn't know what to do with the space between them. The gesture was small, but it was enough to make Emily's heart tighten. She looked up at Anna then, her eyes meeting hers for the first time since everything had changed. Anna's face was drawn, her eyes tired and shadowed with the weight of the past, but there was something else there, too, something Emily hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. "Why did you wait so long?" Emily's voice cracked, the words a raw whisper. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me about the truth? About her?" Anna closed her eyes, the weight of the question settling over her like a blanket. "I was scared," she said, her voice thick with the ache of those years. "Scared of what you would think of me. Scared of what it would do to you." Emily took a deep breath, the air feeling thick in her lungs. She felt the anger stir inside her again, rising up like it had before. She wanted to yell, to scream at Anna for what had been taken from her. She wanted to tear apart the silence that had bound them both, to make her feel the full weight of everything she had lost. But she did single quotes that instead. She lowered her gaze to the locket, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of it. Her mother's locket, the symbol of everything that had been kept from her. The key to the secret that had been buried beneath layers of lies and silence. "I didn't want to be the one to destroy you, Emily," Anna whispered, her voice small now. "But maybe I already did." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt then settle inside her like a weight she didn't want to carry. Maybe it was true. Maybe everything they had been through, everything they had lost, had already destroyed them. Maybe it was too late to ever go back. But then she looked at Anna again, really looked at her. And in that moment, she saw it, the same pain she had carried all these years, the same longing for something that had been lost. It wasn't about forgiveness yet. Not fully. Not after everything. But it was about the beginning of something. The first crack in the wall they had built around themselves. "I don't know how to forgive you," Emily said, her voice quiet, the words heavy in the silence. "I don't know if I ever will." Anna nodded, her face crumpling as if the weight of the admission had crushed her. She took a step back, the space between them widening again. She didn't try to explain herself. She didn't try to make it right. She just stood there, her eyes meeting Emily's for one brief moment, and then the silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. This time, it felt like a beginning. The room was still. The past, with all its weight and shadows, was heavy in the air. But for the first time, Emily didn't feel like she was drowning in it. The journey toward healing wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be easy. But it was a journey that had to be taken. Step by fragile step, the wind swept across the cemetery, its chill cutting through the quiet like a forgotten whisper. Emily and Anna stood side by side, both older now, the lines on their faces telling the stories they no longer needed to speak. The gravestone in front of them was simple, the name carved into the stone almost unrecognizable after all these years. It wasn't the stone that mattered, it was the woman it represented, the one who had kept them apart for so long. The woman who had been their mother, but never really a mother. Emily's fingers brushed against the edge of the locket she still wore around her neck. It had been her mother's, a piece of the past she had clung to long after the truth had shattered it. She had wondered, back then, if this moment would ever come. If she would ever be able to stand here and feel anything but the weight of betrayal. And yet, here they were together. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, changed. Perhaps it had never truly gone away, but they had learned to carry it differently. Anna stood a few steps behind her, her gaze fixed on the grave, the sorrow still hanging heavy in the air. The years had softened her, but there were scars there too. Scars that would never truly heal. She hadn't come to the grave as someone seeking forgiveness. She had come as someone who had already forgiven, someone who had already reconciled with the ghost that had haunted her. Do you think she would have ever told us? Anna's voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. She wasn't asking for answers, she was just asking for the company of her sister's silence, for someone to share the weight of the question. Emily's gaze stayed fixed on the gravestone. She never had the chance, she said, the words heavier than they should have been. And maybe that was her choice. Maybe she knew that we would find our way eventually. Anna didn't reply, but the ache in her eyes was all Emily needed to see. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes from knowing, truly knowing, the depth of each other's pain. A silence that didn't demand anything from them. The moment stretched on, both of them standing there, two halves of a whole that had once been broken beyond repair. Emily reached over and took Anna's hand, squeezing it gently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The locket in Emily's hand felt heavier now, as though it had taken on a life of its own. She had kept it close all these years, carrying it as a symbol of the woman who had made them both, and then unmade them. It had been a piece of the past she couldn't escape. But now, with Anna beside her, she realized that it was no longer just her burden to bear. It wasn't just her story. It was theirs. She opened the locket carefully, as though afraid of what might spill out. Inside, the small picture of their mother still sat, faded with time, but the face was unmistakable. The woman they had both loved, hated, and mourned, all at once. The woman who had tried to protect them by keeping them apart. The woman whose secrets had cost them so much. Emily closed the locket, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't realized it, but the weight of the years, of all the pain, of all the silence, had finally lifted, if only for a moment. She wasn't sure if she had forgiven her mother. She wasn't sure if she could. But she knew, for the first time in her life, that she was free of the anger. Free of the shame. Anna stood beside her, her hand still in Emily's, and they both turned away from the grave. The past had a way of following them, of lingering in the shadows, but for the first time, they weren't looking back. They didn't need to. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk together. They had stumbled, both of them, on the road to healing. They had fallen more times than they could count. But with each step, they had found a way to rise again. And though the scars would never fade completely, they had learned to walk side by side. They had found their footing. Emily and Anna walked away from the graveside, their steps slow but sure. The years of silence, of lost time, would never be fully erased. The lies, the pain, the betrayal, they would always be a part of them. But they weren't the same women who had stood there all those years ago, broken and lost. They were survivors. The wind lifted again, soft against their faces. As they walked through the cemetery, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. The world was changing, shifting, and for the first time in so long, they could see the horizon ahead, wide and open.